I was talking to Father just before Mass, and I related an experience we had, and he asked me to repeat it to you before he gives his homily. We were at Mount Horeb at the site of the Transfiguration, and there was a group of us at the big church of the Transfiguration, and we had evidently excavated around it because there was a low stone wall around it. But right beside it was this massive tree. It wasn't so tall, but it was as wide as can be. And my initial thought was it's like a banyan tree you see in Hawaii. It's just wide as can be. And there was a sign that said, do not touch anything. But of course, it didn't. That didn't concern the priest. And our priest was up there, and I was standing down below, and he said, "Charlie, have you ever seen a mustard seed?" And I held my hand up so he could sprinkle some seeds in it. And when I brought it down, my palm was cupped, and there were no seeds in it. They were disappeared. And then I opened it up, and there were several seeds hidden in the crease of the palm of my hand. It is that small.
And now you have a little bit of a clearer picture when you hear that gospel, when you hear Jesus tell that parable of what he's talking about. And I wanted Deacon Charlie to share that because I've never been there. I've never experienced it. I would have had to say something like mustard seed is about the size of what used to come out of pixie sticks. That's my frame of reference. So I'm glad we got it more authentic there. I love Jesus' parables. And I love them because there's always a hook. There's always a catch. It's never what it seems. If you read the story, you just kind of go, oh, okay, isn't that nice? No, then the parable has not succeeded. There's always something in it that is some form of exaggeration or a surprise ending. And that's why Jesus used it to teach about the kingdom that he was proclaiming, the reign of God, God's way, God's will truly coming into all hearts over the entire earth. The message that he would always give in these parables, in addition to explaining something about the kingdom, was what you have learned, you need to relearn. If you are going to understand the kingdom of God, you've got to come up with different understandings and different standards than maybe what you've grown up with all your life. You've got to be willing to take on a different outlook. See things through God's eyes rather than through society's customs or the expectations that we have learned. And it raises, I think, a good question for us. How much are we willing to be challenged in our faith versus how much do I just want to be told what I already think and already believe? Do I want the Word to be formed to my expectations, or am I willing to let the Word form me? There's a reason that I raise this question. This Thursday, folks, it's going to be a big day. It's going to be a big deal. And I know some of you already know this. You know that Thursday, all day they're doing half-price shakes at Sonic. But that's not what I'm talking about. Besides that, it's a big day because on Thursday, Pope Francis's encyclical entitled Blessed Be is going to be released. And it's going to be an exciting time, I think, to be a Catholic, because it's going to be fun to sit back and watch people go off on it without even reading it, without even paying attention to what it's about. We've already had one presidential candidate who has made a fool of himself by saying, "Well, I could write a better letter than the Pope could. The church should stick to morality and leave science to the scientists." And apart from the fact that the Pope does have a background in science, there is the reality that what our Holy Father, in talking about the environment, is doing is speaking on a moral level. Stewardship of creation is one of the basic central themes in Catholic social teaching. We have a responsibility, and it's not just, tree hugger stuff. Some of you might have already switched me off, saying, "Oh, geez, here we go, more environmental crap." No. Because when you have a church teaching, the first thing that you have, if you have a statement of the gospel values, the teachings of the church. And when you are talking about something like the environment, as is the case with any issue, the central reality the church teaches is the dignity of the human person. And from that, we draw themes like the respect for human life, the preferential option for the poor, and several others. So the first part of this encyclical, even though I have not read it, I know will be a statement of how is it that the gospel message of Jesus applies in this case, applies in this situation. And it will state the moral norms, it will state the principles. And it will say anyone who is to follow Christ, who is a believer, has to accept these. Those are the basic realities. The fact that we are called to be stewards of creation. that this planet is still God's creation. We have been given it to be caretakers for all and for future generations. That's not politics. That's basic morality. So you have themes. And then from there, you get a bit more into the specifics. How do we deal with this? And it's in those specifics that people of good faith can disagree. No, I don't think that approach will work. No, that's not taking into account enough things, but not the basic faith principles. But come Thursday, like I say, if you just kind of pay attention, you're going to hear them go off on both sides with dealing with the applications. Not talking at all about the principles. Not focusing on what God calls us to as His followers. One of the quotes from Pope Francis. You are called to care for creation, not only as responsible citizens, but also as followers of Christ. Now, how we as a people do that, that then relies, hopefully, on our wisdom, our willingness to cooperate, our willingness to try to achieve the common good. One of the other things that I'm sure the Pope's encyclical will remind us is that this isn't just an issue of science, that this is an issue of justice. Because when there are changes in creation, when there are changes in the climate, it affects the poor more deeply than it does those who are well off. And we as Christian people are always called to have that greater concern for the poor and to be in solidarity with them. But that's not going to be what you see on TV. You'll hear them talking about debates of global warming, climate change. No, this isn't really happening, blah, 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 all of that. Pope doesn't know what he's talking about, so we can just ignore that. And my isn't that convenient. There's, I think, going to be a lot of emphasis in the Catholic Church in the next year or so on what we call issues of social justice. Stewardship of creation just being one of them. The American bishops' immigration is a very important one as well. We're going to, as Christians, take a look at ourselves. Are my politics formed by my faith? Or is my faith formed by my politics? I've already taken a stand on one side or the other, so now I will accept that part of what I think Jesus' message is to back up what I want it to be. And this cuts both ways, folks. I'm not talking about one side or the other. Wonderful quote that I've had for a long time from Archbishop Renato Martino. He said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if liberals could muster up as much love for unborn children as they do for baby whales or seals or trees? And wouldn't it be great if conservatives realized that Jesus' command to love applies to criminals and refugees as much as it does to middle-class Christians and unborn babies?" We're not called to one side or the other. We're not called to one party or the other. What we choose, that's fine. We are called to be followers of Christ, to be embracers of the gospel, builders of the kingdom. Peoples whose hearts are filled with love for God and concern for our fellow men and women.